Well, it's of no use you being in. No one will see your head. Good morning, all. Audio level, testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. David Crisafulli, let me know when you're good to go. Thank you. Thanks, Gura. Well, this morning, Trevor and I have spent some time listening to brave locals tell their story about their interaction with law and order in this beautiful region. And make no mistake, Toowoomba is in the grips of a crime epidemic. And the stories we heard today about the impacts of people having their homes broken into, their cars stolen, living in fear, that's no way for a beautiful region like this to live. And it follows what has been an incident that has rocked this community, and to the family of Robert Brown, who we understand is in a very bad way. Any Queenslander looks at that situation and expresses all the best to his friends and family. No one deserves to have what happened to Robert waiting for a cab. No one deserves to see scenes like that in a state where people have the right to go about their business and not have to live in fear. Now, make no mistake, laws were watered down in 2015, and on the back of it we have a generation of repeat young offenders, and they are wreaking havoc on the state, and it's got to stop. And we repeatedly say that if the Premier is serious about doing something about this, the legislation that is going to be tabled in Parliament when we resume in a couple of weeks' time should be out there for the public to see. Queenslanders deserve to have their say. And this morning, Trevor and I listened to some Queenslanders, and all of them had some worthy suggestions. Surely they have the right to have a look at that legislation and put forward their suggestions for change. And we have done the same, and repeatedly said that we will back anything that the government believes can make a difference. We would like them to express the same level of maturity and listen to what we are talking about when we say breach of bail has to be an offence. You can't have a situation where a Youth Justice Act doesn't have consequences for actions. We have created a generation of repeat young offenders. We are also failing young kids early in their journey of crime, and I'm not going to give up on them. They're the kids that we need to get in early and help turn their life around. But at the other end of the scale is a generation that have seen the results of a system that doesn't have consequences for action, and they are ripping communities apart, and they are costing Queenslanders their lives, and they are costing Queenslanders the feeling of safety. They are costing Queenslanders the ability to go out and hop in a car and earn a living. My final point before I hand over to Trevor, I just want to make an observation. The Premier has again today spoken about a so-called cohort of 10% of repeat offenders. It is now 17%, and the government's own figures show that. The figures, which we are quoting, went from 10 to 17% while the Premier was on leave. Now, either she knows about it and is deliberately not telling Queenslanders, or she is still checked out and her mind is still on holidays. But one way or another, we have to face up to the fact that 17% of repeat hardcore offenders is a figure that no Queenslander wants to see. We've got to be honest about this. This cohort has grown from 10 to 17%. They are ripping communities apart, and they are convincing the next generation to follow their lead into a life of crime. And these changes have to be put on the table. We have to all work together in a mature way. We need to fix the Youth Justice Act that was broken in 2015, and we have to stop the youth crime epidemic that is gripping this state. Over to you, Watsy.
Where do you want my eye line, guys? How's everybody's audio? Trevor Watts, member for Toowoomba North. All okay? Queensland's crime crisis is hitting my community of Toowoomba hard. The Premier has been on holiday for 6 weeks. Now is the time for her to make the hour-and-a-half drive up from Brisbane to Toowoomba, listen to the people in my community who are huddled, scared in their houses, with the doors locked, the air conditioning on, and baseball bats under their beds because they can't sleep comfortably. It is time for this Premier to act and stop hiding. So we have had suggestions this morning from someone who operates a fuel outlet, who said if they knew in real time that cars have been stolen, they could refuse to provide fuel when they pull in to fuel up. I think that's a suggestion that's worthy of exploring to find out what may or may not be able to be done in that area. But overwhelmingly, what people were saying is they want machete-wielding youths removed from our community. Everybody is supportive of rehabilitation for someone who's committed some minor crimes. But if you are walking around our community in broad daylight with a 2-foot-long machete, trying people's doors and car handles, you should have your freedoms restricted so the rest of us don't have to lock ourselves away in fear. That was their suggestion. Breach of bail needs to be part of the reform that's put forward by this Premier.
Trevor, there's a lot of anger. Are we concerned at all about seeing a rise in vigilantism in Toowoomba?
I'm very concerned that if the Premier and her government don't act to bring justice to victims, that victims or potential victims may start taking the law into their own hand. I can only say to those people, please don't. I am very concerned where that would end in our community. But people are frustrated, people are afraid, and look, let's face it, if you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and someone's got a 2-foot machete and they're standing in your lounge room, what is it you are supposed to do?
Well, look at the figures. Look at what happened with crime over that period of time. Compare the number of vehicles that are being stolen now and the increase that's happened year on year. Now, I'm not going to suggest that we shouldn't continue to improve and do things better, but the decision to water down the laws in 2015 had broken the youth justice system, and Queenslanders are living it right now. So, you know, I'm happy to look at any change that gets put forward, and my style is always, I'm not about opposition for opposition's sake. I just want the government to be equally as mature, and I haven't met a Queenslander who doesn't believe that we aren't in the middle of a youth crime epidemic. Now, different Queenslanders see it from different ways, and I've spoken with groups who are really focused on early intervention, and I think they've got some really worthy points that we should listen to. Likewise, I've stood beside victims of crime who don't believe that at the other end of the spectrum we're keeping our community safe. But one way or another, the laws that are in place now and were watered down in 2015 aren't working. They were watered down and they broke the Youth Justice Act. And anything short of at least embedding consequences for action, making sure that police can hold people accountable for breaching their bail conditions, is failing the Queenslanders who are demanding change. We do, and we believe it's a simple amendment to the Bail Act. It's that simple. Now, if you get to a situation where you send a message to the hardcore, the repeat 17%, that you are going to be held accountable for breaching your conditions, you are going to have consequences for bad behaviour, that can help curb that hardcore group. At the other end of the spectrum, we need to get back to providing hope and opportunity and education and employment. And at both ends of the spectrum at the moment, Queensland is failing the people who want to see safety in their streets. We're failing the young offenders early on in their journey of crime, and and we are failing Queenslanders by allowing the hardcore 17% to go about the marauding behaviour, carrying weapons, posting their exploits online without fear of any form of retribution. They know that the Act protects them. They know that their rights are greater than the rights of the victim, and that's not a modern Queensland. We'll back anything that is put forward to try and curb a crime. But in the end, police at the moment are being asked to do a job with one hand tied behind their back. There are 12 fewer police in Queensland than there were 2 years ago, and they have laws that are at the weakest they've been. Is there any wonder why police are fed up, and is there any wonder why the community has reached breaking point? We are in the middle of a youth crime epidemic, and anything short of fixing the Youth Justice Act that was broken in 2015 won't cut it in the eyes of Queenslanders. They've heard all of this before. They've heard all of the promises about task force and numbers of points plans, but until there are consequences for action, until there is proper early intervention, until there is breach of bail is able to be held accountable, this revolving door of the broken youth justice system will continue.
Why is the LNP calling for an inquiry into children being held in watch houses, and what do you want it to focus on?
We want an acknowledgement that when the watch house scandal broke several years ago, the government made a commitment that that wouldn't happen anymore. And to hear stories of kids detained for weeks on end in a watch house, that doesn't help the rehabilitation process that's needed. Now, consequences for action has to be at the heart of all we do, but so is human decency and dignity. And housing kids in watch houses was something that was ruled out many years ago, and we shouldn't be back there again.
But wouldn't you think that reinstating breach of bail as an offence might cause more children to be held in watch houses if implemented?
Not if you send a strong message that there are consequences for bad behaviour. What that will do is stop young people from getting involved in a life of crime. At the moment, the greatest reason why people are living the nightmare they are is because we have a generation who have looked up to older kids who haven't been held accountable for their behaviour. Change that, remove the nonsense that allows young people, those hardcore repeat, to go about their business, and you will fix the culture of the pipeline that's coming through of young people. So I don't accept that if you have consequences for action, you'll have more people committing crime. It'll have the opposite effect. It'll send a message to kids that they will be held accountable for their bad behaviour. And if at the other end of the spectrum, you're serious about spending money on early intervention, you can get kids before they get into the youth justice system. No, it's heartbreaking. They're a great family, and Vicky is one of the great Queenslanders that I've had the pleasure of meeting. And the fact that after a decade the fire still burns inside her for justice for her daughter, but for other Queenslanders caught up in the absolute mess that is the DNA laboratory, shows what sort of person she is. And I think she's made a difference, but there's a long way to go, and she's in for the long haul, and every Queenslander should be thankful, because at the heart of any good justice system is the ability for people to have the tools to get the justice they deserve. Well, I stood before the gallery late last year and made the observation that the bikies were back, and this has confirmed it. And it's in the same way that youth crime has been able to flourish on the back of changes of laws. This is the same playbook. Laws were watered down, the bikies feel emboldened, and here is one of the bosses back on the coast. And when you water down laws, you send the wrong message, and the winners are the bad guys and the losers are the people who just want their city to feel safe. And we warned about this. We warned about this last year. And the bikies are back. And they're back because the laws were watered down and it allows them to go about their business freely. And that's no good for anyone.
From your talk to patients this morning on Olympic infrastructure funding, she says there's been no delay. Will you bring with that?
Well, I just show the words that the comments that she made a year ago about a delivery authority. Look, I'm going to make this point. The Olympics are a once-in-a-generation opportunity to get infrastructure right across Queensland if it's done in the right way. It can't be a vanity exercise for one person, and it can't be about a big party with red carpet and champagne on the event. It is about a 10-year pipeline to deliver infrastructure where all levels of government come together, and then 10 years after, where we as a state can put forward that infrastructure as a great livable place and a tourism offering with a 20-year vision. That's what the Olympics should be about. Now, I would go back to comments that were made a year ago around funding, the importance of that funding being 50-50, around partnerships on the delivery authority, and I would question whether or not we've made the best use of that year. That said, I have a vision for a tourism offering in this state that will make the most of our magnificent natural environment in an environmentally respectful way. I have a vision for infrastructure delivery that can make sure that Queenslanders can have their lives improved as we grow. And the Olympics can be an opportunity to do that for all of Queensland. But in order to do that, the delivery authority has to be about everyone, not one person.
Do you agree with that stance on the 50-50 funding? She said she wanted to.
Of course. But if you recall, before the election, it was almost as though the election was a referendum on 50-50 funding, on health, on Olympic infrastructure. We haven't heard a lot about it since the election. We were promised that a change of government in Canberra would deliver 50-50 funding for health and infrastructure. And since the election, there hasn't been the same level of commentary about that from the state government. And I think that's disappointing, because I was willing to back it when there was the blue team in Canberra, and my view hasn't changed now that there's the red team. I'm only worried about the maroon team, and I don't care the colour of the money in Canberra. I just want to make sure that Queensland gets its fair share. And if people look at the commentary that's come out of the state in the last half a year or more, it seems like it's more about politics in Canberra than people in Queensland. 50-50 funding is fair, and it should be on the table for both health and Olympic infrastructure, as we were promised it would be before the election.
And just on the federal government's decision to reject Clive Palmer's Central Queensland mine, do you support that decision, or do you back what your federal LNP colleagues say?
Oh, it's a matter for them. And you always know that I don't spend my time making commentary about other levels of government. I talk about the things that matter to Queenslanders. A decision has been taken by the federal government, and that's the decision that we have to abide by. Well, it's following the same playbook. And when the laws were watered down in 2015, Townsville was the first cab off the rank where crime began to spiral out of control. But it's now spread like wildfire throughout Queensland. And what we're seeing in Toowoomba, no one would have ever thought could possibly have happened, even a handful of years ago. This morning, some of the comments that were made by people in that room were chilling. Comments from parents who leave keys and a wallet with some money at the front door just so that a bad guy doesn't walk past the room where their daughters sleep. That is not the conversation someone should be having in a modern Queensland, in a beautiful place like Toowoomba. Spoke to someone who told me about the impact of losing her car in November. Her insurance covered it for 2 weeks. She's forked out for nearly 3 months to have a hire car at $1,000 a week, and she's been up for nearly $1,000 on her excess. She had a whole heap of shopping in the back seat that could never be replaced. Prescription sunnies that only got filled last week, so She's been spent several months without those. These are the impacts. There are impacts on your safety, there's impacts financially, there's impacts on your mental well-being, and it's time for the Premier to listen to real Queenslanders, because the only person who doesn't believe we're in the middle of a youth crime epidemic is the Premier and her inner cabal, because everywhere I go in Queensland, people have had enough. They have had enough of people being bashed in the streets, of going into someone's home with a knife. That ain't on. And we are failing people at both ends of the scale, and I'm not going to walk away from that. My style has always been, it's not just about one end of the spectrum. It is also at the other end, where we've got to do more to help kids early on. But this community at the moment is ground zero, because people have seen the wildfire that has burnt from a beautiful, safe, embracing community to one where people are living in fear. And as Trevor said, sleeping with a bat underneath your bed is no way to be sleeping. Having yourself caged up like a rat is no way to live. And change must be made. And it has to be made to the Youth Justice Act that was watered down in 2015, and it has to embed consequences for action. And it starts with breach of bail as an offence. Thank you. Thanks all. Good day. No dramas at all. Thank you, guys. Thanks very much.